All right, guys. Well, this is our very first live stream, and we're really excited to be here with you. Um, Having a little bit of technical difficulties, so I don't know if we're gonna. I don't think we're gonna be able to take phone calls or voicemails today. But if you guys call in today and leave messages, we will get them on the podcast and talk about them at a later date.
Hey,
So, Danny, how are you doing?
doing good. Just jumping in. As always, Henry is the brains of the operation when it comes to the tech. I'm sort of just a follower, but he got it working. We went through crisis mode, but we're only a few minutes late, so we're just happy to be here. And man, we would love to answer any chats or comments you've got because we're ready to roll.
All righty. So, first thing I want to talk about today, Danny, is Ronnie Jackson.
Oh, man.
Granted, he's no longer in the running to be a VA secretary, which is great, but I think it's important that we talk to everybody about why we're so glad he's not and where all that information came from. So, going online recently, I found a summary that involved 23 colleagues and former colleagues of Rear Admiral Jackson and discussing a lot of really dumb stuff that he's done. Multiple individuals cited the nickname Candyman used by White House staff because he would provide whatever prescriptions they sought for paperwork. A nurse noted that he wrote himself prescriptions. When caught, he had somebody else, his physician's assistant, do it. He would have staff write prescriptions for others to give to non-beneficiaries, people that he shouldn't have been talking to. Drunkenness. Multiple incidents of drunkenness on duty was described to the committee staff.
Hey, Henry, what happens to an enlisted soldier if they are caught drunk on duty?
Oh, Lord. With a weapon or without a weapon?
Let's do both, one and the other.
All right, so without a weapon is not, we'll say it's not as bad. You're still going to get an Article 15 of some kind.
That means disciplinary punishment from your commander.
Yep, probably some days of extra duty. You'd work your normal 8 or 10 hours a day as a soldier. You get off that, then you do another 4 to however many hours of extra duty for a period of time. And that's the thing, is if you really want to understand how military leaders treat people, talk to their subordinates and talk to their colleagues. And that's why this information is so important, because Danny reminded me earlier that if you looked at somebody's NCOER, their evaluation report for being a sergeant, or their OERs, what Danny would still get being in the service, that doesn't always really reflect character. What if their boss didn't like them? What if they had constantly butted heads for all kinds of reasons?
Or the flip side of that, what if their boss loved them because they were a kiss ass? So I know guys, and you do too, I'm sure, who have a career full of glowing recommendations that, I wouldn't follow to Walmart because they're pieces of shit.
Nope.
So like you're saying, if you want to know about an officer, ask his sergeant what they think of him, and ask his enlisted soldiers. If you want to know about a sergeant, ask his enlisted soldiers, ask his junior sergeants, and then maybe ask like his lieutenant or captain. The colonel doesn't know much about you. No matter, he just doesn't.
You're a name on a clipboard.
That's right.
I mean, that you can't really be more than that. The colonel doesn't have time for.
You're the last 4 of a social security number.
Yeah. So, moving off of that, there has been a couple rumors about the chance that John Kelly will be moved from White House Chief of Staff over to Veterans Affairs, which I guess in the total picture isn't bad. He was a 4-star. He knows how to manage. He knows how to do a lot of things, and he doesn't have medical experience. That would be the one real big downfall I'd say he'd have. But
as far as General Shinseki didn't either, right? Under Obama.
No, he didn't. So, and that's not to say Kelly might not do he might do a great job. I don't know. But as far as that goes, it really feels like that Trump doesn't care about
qualifications or experience.
He doesn't care about the mettle of the people that he puts in place. And the Veterans Affairs, you've said it a bunch, I've said it a bunch, it is the biggest second biggest section of our government, and billions and billions of dollars. So
your healthcare, my healthcare for the rest of our lives.
Oh yeah,
millions of others. Well, if I could just say something about Kelly, like first of all, let's just back up for a second and remind our listeners. John Kelly was a 4-star Marine general. John Kelly is now the chief of staff of the White House. That is the most political position in Washington. So the whole idea that generals and even former generals are supposed to be sort of apolitical servants of the nation has been thrown out the window with John Kelly. And John Kelly's defense of things like the Muslim ban, of anything Trump says, the wall, etc., has shown that this is a highly politicized individual who showed us his stripes. And his stripes are wildly motherfucking conservative, okay? And if you're into that, that's great. But if you actually believe in a nonpartisan generalship, then he's in the wrong position, in my opinion, right? It's inappropriate. I'm not saying that former generals shouldn't serve in government, but being Secretary of Defense, that makes sense, maybe. Being head of the VA, that kind of makes sense to me. You know, when General Shinseki took over, I mean, there was a lot of controversy, but I thought it was fine. I'd rather see John Kelly do that than this utterly political position that he's in.
Yeah, I think the thing with General Shinseki is that he actually wanted the VA to go farther than the internal civilian leaders of the VA could actually see at that point. All right. So our next thing for this evening is that earlier this week, I had the great opportunity to sit down with Tyson Manker, and he's an attorney from Illinois and a Marine Corps OIF 1 veteran. And we got the chance to talk about his bad paper discharge. And due to a single incident of using marijuana, he got a less than honorable discharge. And he said it has just obliterated his life in a whole bunch of different ways. And thankfully for him, some other programs were able to help him, some civilian side stuff, and he was able to get his law degree and kind of move on from everything. But now he's involved in a class action lawsuit against the Navy Discharge Review Board, because in 2014, SecDef Chuck Hagel gave new guidance saying that they were supposed to now give liberal consideration to a troop's PTSD, TBI injury, or some other mitigating circumstance. The Air Force and the Army both got the message. They went from 88% rejection rate down to like a 45% rejection rate. The Navy and the Marine Corps have not budged. And so there are a lot of Marines and there are a lot of sailors that are looking for some kind of relief in upgrading their discharge, and they haven't been able to get that.
You know, that doesn't surprise me. If you look at things like integration of women, minorities, homosexuals, any of these like issues involving progressive movement, the Marine Corps traditionally has tended to be lagging behind, and the Navy as well. They're very traditional services. They're not usually on the forefront. They're actually usually dragged kicking and screaming into modernity, you know, so it's not, and that's nothing against the Marines or the Navy. It's just, it's factually, it's empirically correct. And I think it's fascinating, and our listeners should know that.
I read something that mentioned about that both the Navy and the Marine Corps have a long tradition of never second guessing commanders. And so if a commander on the ground made a decision, whether it's a combat decision or a discharge decision, that their higher ups are very unlikely to challenge that because they have so much faith in their subordinates, which can be equally good and equally horrifying. And we're talking about the equally horrifying. I have a short clip I want to play for you guys. Hold on one second. Let me get this thing to play this thing.
You know, while he's getting that clip up, I just want to say, I mean, let's all just think for a second about marijuana and how 50 years from now, I promise you, we're going to look back at marijuana being illegal, and we're going to think that that's about as crazy as not letting interracial couples get married. It's going to look equally silly down the road. Our kids are going to laugh at us and ask us, why in the world is marijuana illegal? So to think the number of soldiers, we're probably talking tens of thousands of soldiers who have been dishonorably discharged or other than honorably discharged for marijuana use, which is going to be legal in every state. You wait and see. It's going to happen.
Oh yes, absolutely. But it's just a ridiculous choice, especially on the part of the people that know it's going to come, but they just continue to fight it.
Yeah. And of course, look at our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. He says that good people don't smoke marijuana, which that should actually preclude him from being Attorney General. That statement alone should make him unqualified to be Attorney General, because that is a shocking statement. It's obtuse, it's ignorant, and it just shows that our federal government right now is in the hands of reactionaries.
Okay, well, It's not letting me play it for right now, but we'll just keep plugging along here.
Yeah.
Well,
Can I just jump in a little bit more about like the marijuana thing? So
sure.
Let's break it down for people, okay? You get an other than honorable discharge. You get a dishonorable discharge. It affects your employment in the future. It affects your VA benefits, okay? So you're going to get less benefits from the VA, which means your service is essentially nullified from the perspective of not only finances but healthcare. That's one. And number two, it affects these people's ability to get jobs in the future. So these people who their characterization of their service is other than honorable. But what's fascinating about that is you could serve honorably for, say, 6 years, 2 deployments to Iraq, and you're honorable during that whole period, but you come back and you do cocaine, right? You're an idiot one night, you get drunk, and you let someone talk you into using cocaine or marijuana or something like that that's precluded or illegal. Now you come up hot on a drug test, and you might get an other than honorable discharge. Well, that other than honorable discharge doesn't say on the paperwork, hey, this was a great dude who made a single mistake, and he was other than honorable for those 12 hours, but the other 6 years he was honorable, right? So that's the problem with these sort of characterizations, is they don't allow for a second chance. And another thing is, and I'll give an example of 2 of my soldiers, and luckily I was able to protect them to a certain extent. What happens when you get some soldiers who come back who've served honorably in Afghanistan for a year, watched their friends die, and now I'm talking about 2 individuals who are real, suffer from massive PTSD that they still suffer from, but they did cocaine. And they lied to me about it, and they equivocated, and they were wrong, man, they were wrong. But it was on the weekend, it wasn't on duty, and it was after this deployment, and they were suffering. They were suffering right here and right here. And the thing is, I fought really hard for them to get a relatively light punishment, not because I didn't think it was a serious infraction. It was, but what I was not willing to do was to watch them as a commander get an other than honorable discharge that would affect their life. Because to me, I want to look at the whole of a person, right? What is the characterization of their whole? None of us would like to be held accountable for every decision in our lives. How many people got behind the wheel of a car when they shouldn't have? How many people used a substance at some point when they shouldn't have? How many people, had an extramarital affair? People do very wonderful things throughout the course of their life and make mistakes. And so unless you're committing the most just disgusting crimes repetitively, I think it's very dangerous to characterize someone's military service as other than honorable. Rant complete.
What you're describing is almost exactly identical with Tyson's experience. He was an exemplary Marine for 4 years. He came home from from the invasion, from the very beginning of the war, and he was home with some buddies, and he was just trying to relax. He was trying to deal with all of this, and that one moment cost him his discharge. And I agree with you absolutely. The saddest part about it is that my time as a drug investigator showed me that commanders weren't lenient. Commanders didn't care. They didn't care about the reasons. They didn't care about, or whether or not they were good troops, whether or not this was somebody that could be rehabilitated in some way, or just receive their punishment and go on with their life. But it goes back to that whole conservative mindset of things about marijuana, and it doesn't recognize that for lots of us, including myself, marijuana is pain medicine. It really is. But
we can go into a whole topic on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so let's pull back the curtain again for a second. So I'm going to give the commander's perspective. You said that a lot of commanders, in your experience, were not lenient. And I can tell you, peek behind the curtain for our viewers for a second and tell them why. Here's what really happens. What really happens is all the captains, who are the commanders, right, who are the company and troop commanders and battery commanders, they are all scared of their colonels, because that colonel, what he writes about you is the rest of your career, man. He could end your career. He can change your life. So what do the captains do? The captains look at the colonel and they try to read his mind. Now, if that colonel starts saying some shit in meetings, like, we need to get these drug dealers and these drug users out of our unit. We need a disciplined unit. Now, those colonels can't legally, it's called undue command influence. Those colonels cannot legally tell the captain what to recommend in terms of discipline. But he doesn't have to say that outright. The captains know. So if you have a conservative colonel who's made it clear that he wants a highly disciplined, zero tolerance unit, all the captains are going to fall in line without him telling them. Yep. Because they read the room, man. They mind meld with their boss, and it's a natural human reaction. And most people do not have the courage or the moral fortitude to stand up and put themselves on the line on behalf of a soldier. And that's a sad reality. And that's one of the things that turned me off about the military, and continues to, is the extent to which people, put their values second and their careers first. And that's not just officers, but especially among the commanders, I've seen that.
No, it was really frustrating for me because part of doing the casework for the UAs was to contact the commander, and sometimes it was their company commander, sometimes it was their battalion commander, but I would go into it, and there was, I'd say, at least half to more of the people wanted to stay in the military, and these were not habitual offenders. These weren't guys that had tons of UAs. Those guys always got chaptered. I had one guy who he had one UA, had prior drug problems.
UA is urinalysis, meaning that on the urinalysis he came up hot for drugs.
Yes, thank you, Danny. I should
No problem.
I should have said that. So, anyways, but you would hear all this pain and all this suffering, and most of it was from deployments. And I tried to impart that on these commanders, and it was they were just so stoned about it. They're just so and yeah, it's just so freaking frustrating to do that, especially for people that wanted to stay in. There were guys that would, hey, Investigator Henriksen, I really want to stay in the military. Can you please do something, help something? And I said, I will gladly speak to your commander, but I don't have any control past that point.
We ask so much of these kids. We stretch the rubber band in their soul as far as it can go. And when it snaps, and when they turn to alcohol, or when they turn to drugs, or when they maybe depression and they turn to meds and they overuse them, then we're surprised. Then we're going to drop the hammer on a motherfucker's head. But remember, we asked him, our country asked him to do horrific things, to see horrific things. And then when the repercussions come, then we're not lenient, right? Or then we're not understanding. And to me, that's just like the ultimate hypocrisy. And we see it time and again. And it's not just with these issues. But talk about medical marijuana, right? You talk about PTSD and guys maybe turn to alcohol, all right? I've been there. A lot of us have. A lot of us have seen it. A lot of us have experienced it. And now you're going to punish somebody? I'm not saying you tolerate drunkenness on duty, especially with a weapon. I'm not saying you don't punish. I'm saying you don't ruin someone's life behind it, because remember, there's a reason this happened. It's a real thing,
Absolutely.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, I've found out, has been changed in the paperwork. Okay, they don't call it post-traumatic stress disorder on your paperwork anymore from the VA. It says TSD, traumatic stress disorder. The idea being it's not post, it's not over, it's an ongoing process.
Good. That's a good call on their part. I think that it should be called that. Danny, what's your experience with the Army Substance Abuse Program?
Well, it's changed. The name has changed. I can't remember what it's called now. ASAP, the Army Substance Abuse Program, has generally been a command-referred program that was only punitive, at least in my years, or early years in command. Essentially, a soldier went to ASAP, the alcohol or the Army Substance Abuse Program, for an alcohol or drug problem because they came up hot on a test or because they got a DUI or something like that. And so what it became was this punitive measure rather than a real rehab program that would improve. So it's just like Jeff Sessions, right? It's just like when the Keebler Elf gives his opinion on drugs or the justice system. There's two ways to look at drug infractions, right? And there always have been. And that is the punitive method, that it's a crime and punishment problem. We treat it accordingly. And the other one is to look at it as a health issue, right? Now, the Europeans, the Australians, all the other developed countries in the world, all the other industrialized countries in the world treat drug use and drug abuse as a health problem. Okay, that's their primary means. The United States is alone in that we have tended to treat it as a crime and punishment problem. And so far, we have filled our prisons and emptied our military through discharges of these offenders without helping them, right? And I think that's an important thing. So you've got to look in your soul, whether you're a commander or a sergeant in the Army, or whether you're a prosecutor, or whether you're just someone who's voting for a district attorney, and you've got to ask yourself, how do you think we should handle drug use and abuse? Should we handle it as a medical problem, which is how I think we should look at it? That's the humane way. Or you can look at it as crime and punishment. And all that does is fill prisons, and it doesn't make anyone happier. It doesn't make anyone healthier. It doesn't help families.
With the new whatever ASAP is now, do they still allow, if a soldier comes in prior to urinalysis and says, I need help, that they can not get in trouble for getting help?
I think they can, right? I think they can self-admit to the program. And my understanding is that the program has improved and that it has gone in the direction of rehabilitation rather than just punishment. which is a good thing, and certainly how we should look at it. We have an arm. One of my mentors is a brigadier general now. I'm not going to use his name because I want him to get another star. He has said to me, and I've quoted him anonymously in articles before. He said, Danny, we're killing these kids. We're breaking the Army. And those are direct quotes. And this is a guy with 27 years of service, more deployments than we can count. And he loves soldiers and he cares about them. He's dedicated his life to this. And he says, look, we got an army full of broke-ass kids. And he means physical pain. He means emotional pain even more. He means moral turmoil, you know. And you can only put an army, a volunteer army at war for 17 years. You can do that. But think of the long-term costs. Think of the second and third order effects and ramifications. And I would argue that much of what we're seeing in terms of drug use and abuse, suicide rates, which we're going to talk about, drug use or alcohol dependency, a lot of that is a reflection of 17 years long war. One of my favorite authors, and then I'll stop, is this guy named Tim O'Brien. He's a Vietnam vet. He was an 11 Bravo infantryman in Vietnam. Eventually went back to Harvard and became this famous writer, right? He's won the National Book Award, etc. He has this great quote in a short story called How to Tell a True War Story. And it's all about how do you know if someone's telling you a war story that's accurate. And one of the things he says is, if you don't like profanity, then you don't like truth. If you send soldiers to war, they're going to come back talking dirty. And his point is broader than just the use of language, but that when you make a decision that something is important enough to fight and kill and die for, you have to be prepared for the ramifications of that. And the ramifications are, in our case, right, in our generation's case, 2 to 3 million Iraq and Afghanistan veterans back on the streets, some 900,000 of whom are disabled at some level, okay? That our government will be paying for that for the next, I mean, I'm 34 years old, right? The government's going to be paying for me, hopefully, for another 40 years at least, if you look at the life expectancy of a male in the United States, 40, 45 years. So now, of course, I'll never make it 40 because I'm just a hard liver, you know. I'm kidding, a little.
So, before we go away from the bad paper discussion, I wanted to real quick mention somebody named Will Sanders, and I spoke to Will's mom today by email, and Will was an Army veteran. Got out some years ago, and I believe it was due to PTSD. He took his own life this last January. Specifically, I want to talk to Will's mom about his bad paper situation, and something that Tyson pointed out to me, and I didn't even consider this before I started researching the topic, is about the shame of not having an honorable discharge. You know, there are so few veterans that actually got in trouble and had to get that kind of a discharge. Statistically, it doesn't happen very often. But to have that happen for something so small, and then to being, and I'm not even disenfranchised from using the VA or getting those kind of benefits, but to be disenfranchised from the Marine Corps, from the Army, from your brothers who they all got honorable discharges. They all still have their honor as far as the military is concerned. And we can have a semantic discussion later about honor in the military, but right. it really affects people. And like you said earlier, is that it completely destroys their ability to have any kind of support or benefits from the VA. And to me, that I don't think that should be connected to misconduct. I think medical benefits and compensation for disability should be completely separate from it.
I agree with that. 22 veterans a day killing themselves. Somewhere in the vicinity of 5,500 American soldiers have been killed since 9/11 combat, and somewhere in the vicinity of over 100,000 have committed suicide. Not every one of those suicides is related to PTSD. An enormous number are. To give you an anecdotal case, I'm Major Danny Storson, who's done, 17 years in the Army, including West Point, and I've only seen a small fraction of the military, like from a plane at 30,000 feet through a straw. And even me, just what has touched my life, 2 soldiers under my direct command have committed suicide. Okay, one while he was in the service on leave from Iraq, and one a couple of years after his service. If if a lowly, nobody, middling officer like me has had this touch him so closely twice, you got to multiply that by the tens and hundreds of thousands. This is a national crisis that no one's talking about because we're too busy with Stormy Daniels. We're too busy with Michael Cohen. We're too busy with Russiagate. We're too busy with our goddamn apps on our phones. We're all guilty.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we have a veritable crisis, a moral catastrophe unfolding before our eyes, and it's veteran suicide, and it's all the mental health problems that precede that. That's the story, and this poor woman, and her shattered family. There's not enough well-wishing that we can do to fix it.
No.
What we can do is fix the bad paper discharge problem. We can fix the discharge system because it's too late for my soldiers. It's too late for James Smith and Eddie Faulkner. It's not too late for this generation serving now. And we still have soldiers in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq, and they're not going anywhere, guys.
No, they're not. All right, we're going to move on to a different topic now, a little bit of nuclear proliferation.
That's fun.
Oh, yeah. So recently, The Intercept hosted a conversation between linguistics professor Noam Chomsky and, getting all my words in the order, whistleblower and former Pentagon planner Daniel Ellsberg. And I watched it last night, and it was really interesting to notice the things that they pointed out. But one thing, let's see, our current, actually, hold on, let me go back a little bit. In 1953, our nuclear plan that if we ever got hit, we were supposed to bomb every major city in China. That was actually part of their plan. And the thing is that, I mean, yeah, we've had issues with China and stuff, but we've never had any active engagements against them as far as actual war.
Not since 1953.
So, and it just went on and on like that. And they both came to very much the same conclusion that you and I did, is that the idea of using nuclear weapons in any kind of solvent strategy, a strategy that's not going to obliterate the world, it's just not there. And Mr. Ellsberg made specific mention of the idea of small yield, short range ones.
Yeah, or more dangerous.
Yeah, because the thing is we're still going to have all those second and third order effects from a single bomb. So there's no pipe dream. There's no way that you can possibly write using a nuclear weapon, 1 or a million, that is not going to hurt our planet significantly or kill a bunch or all of us.
There's 3 things I want to say about nuclear weapons policy. Now, Daniel Ellsberg famously leaked the Pentagon Papers, which basically blew the whistle on the entire Vietnam War, showed that it was a catastrophe, showed that we knew we were losing, that every president from Eisenhower to Nixon had lied to the American people. That's what the Pentagon Papers showed. And you bet your ass the Nixon administration tried to stop him from publishing those and tried to put him in prison. Okay? They did. Because the war on whistleblowers is real. And if you think that Donald Trump or even Barack Obama would be any more lenient on the Daniel Ellsbergs of today, I asked Chelsea Manning about that. Okay, but 3 things I want to say about nuclear weapons policy. Number 1, I'm a history teacher. I can tell you that historically, America's nuclear weapons strategy, our stated posture, was immoral and catastrophic. I'm going to come back to that. Second thing I want to say is the United States system of giving the power over nuclear destruction of the planet to one man with no checks and balances, that being the President of the United States. This is not a Donald Trump problem. The fact that any human being can have that kind of power of life and death, literally a button, is frightening. That's the second thing. And the third thing I want to say about nuclear weapons is the worst thing we could do is ever elect a man, which we've done, who starts thinking maybe he could use one. Maybe I'll just use a small one. Maybe there is a way to use nuclear weapons. These weapons are unusable. They are unusable. Maybe we can't get rid of them all right away because we have to have some sort of deterrent so other countries won't attempt a first strike. Not crazy. I understand the need for that. But the minute we start thinking we can use nuclear weapons, we're through the looking hole. All right? We're through the looking glass. We're crazy. Let me back up to the historical side. There was something called PSYOP 62, right? Single Integrated Operational Plan 62, 1962. What this was a document in the Department of Defense highly classified. Only like the president and the chiefs of staff of the Air Force, Strategic Air Command, which is all 4-star positions, could see this. And what it was, Kennedy comes into office and he says, I want to see the war plan, the nuclear war plan. They were like, this is true. The Department of Defense told him, oh, it's classified. He was like, I'm the fucking president. Like, are you crazy? Like, let me see. They had such a convoluted system. Like, the president wasn't read in, okay? But there was an existing war plan. He eventually sees it. They brief him on it. I'm going to tell you what this said. This said that as of fiscal year 1962, hence PSYOP 62, the plan was for the United States to hit every single major Russian city with over 100,000 people, and even some with less. Okay, some cities were getting hit with several nuclear weapons just to make sure they were going to be obliterated. Where estimates were in the range of 100 million dead in Russia. Okay, but this is where it gets even crazier because we're so worried about a second and third order attack. We convinced ourselves what we had to do was actually kill every communist in the world. So if Russia took military action against the United States, our policy was not only to hit all the cities and military bases in Russia, but also all the Soviet military bases in Poland, in Eastern Germany, in Romania, all the other Eastern European countries where the Russians happen to have soldiers. The estimates were that tens of millions of innocent civilians who were in countries that aren't even part of the Soviet Union, just happen to be alive with them, were going to die. And like you mentioned, all the major cities in China were also going to be hit. So in one fell swoop, we had a plan, and this was an actual military plan, to kill 300 to 400 million human beings in an instant. Now, when Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, an imperfect president, but an interesting, intelligent guy, when John F. Kennedy received this briefing, I'm picturing PowerPoint, except back then it was like slides. He said, the quote was, quote, "And we call ourselves human beings. We call ourselves the human race." He was so horrified by what he had seen that he couldn't even believe that human beings could concoct it. And so my point is, with nuclear weapons, if you think that our current military nuclear posture is any less wild and any less absolutely berserk than it used to be, you're wrong. I don't have access to that stuff, but I'm telling you, if you don't think the United States still has a plan for utter obliteration of our enemies immediately, then you're misunderstanding our nuclear posture. The best way to look at nuclear weapons is to start from the position that they cannot be used. If you do not start from that position, if you even let it into your brain that maybe we could use just a few small ones, you're already wrong. You're already on the road to potentially ending the human race. This is too serious. This is too serious to be left to one man. This has to be a congressional discussion. This has to be a massive people's movement like the early 1980s anti-nuclear weapons movement. Nuclear freeze movement was called. This is too important to be left to any one man, especially this individual right now. But really any president, any man. Again, I apologize for ranting, but this is the kind of stuff I know about. This is the kind of stuff we need to talk about. This is crazy.
Absolutely. I'm glad you went through it, Danny. One last thing before we move on to a lighter topic like Syria. Mr. Ellsberg also mentioned that it's curious and very terrifying to him that currently in Syria are 5 of the 9 nuclear powers. That the U.S., Britain, France, Israel, and Russia. Yep. All right there, all in that tiny country that really isn't very big, with different areas sectioned off. We have our lovely northeastern corner there with the Kurds.
Yeah, we own a third of Syria. We own a third of Syria right now, today. America is an occupying. Yeah, that's fun.
So,
well, let's talk about that for a second. Syria is the next topic, right?
Yep.
And I just wrote a piece about Syria. God damn it. If you could just Google me and Syria, I've written about 9 or 10 pieces on this in the last few months. I'm so sick of writing about Syria, but I fear I'll be writing about Syria 3 fucking years from now still. But Henry mentioned that there are currently 5 out of the 9 nuclear powers are militarily involved in the civil war in Syria. Okay? Syria is not a nuclear power, but 5 other countries are fighting proxy wars within Syria. Why does that matter? It matters for the following reason. Essentially, the Euphrates River, which divides the western 2/3 of Syria from the eastern 1/3 of Syria, is essentially the demilitarized zone between the Russian-backed, okay, there's one military power, Russian-backed Assad regime. So we're talking Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and Assad Syrian lunatics are on the west side of that river. On the east side of that river, we're talking about British, French, America, right? So that's 3 more nuclear powers, who are on the eastern side of the river. Now they're staring each other down like it's the Cold War all over again. Okay, and in fact, the United States Air Force and Naval Air Wing has killed Russian mercenaries who were attacking across the river, who were attacking onto our side. All right. Now, luckily the Russians didn't retaliate, and luckily they recognized those were mercenaries and not members of the armed forces. Now, in the southwest corner of Syria, we have Israel on the Golan Heights, okay, which is Syrian territory they still occupy since the 1967 war. Israel has been bombing over 100 times Syrian forces under Bashar al-Assad because they're essentially at war with each other in all but name. Israel's the fifth nuclear power. Why is this important? I have described Syria as a trap before. I even wrote an article called The Syria Trap. And essentially, here's the problem. We are one mistake away from nuclear armed powers going to war over minor bullshit in Syria. And I call it minor bullshit because even though it's a horrific civil war, even though the people of Syria are suffering, the other countries that are involved, we only have a limited interest there. Okay? So it's not worth ending the world over, is what I'm saying. All it would take is one errant American bomb, one foolish Russian general, one bad order. You kill a Russian soldier, who's to say that the Russians don't retaliate? You kill an American soldier. What if the Russians, one of their Air Force pilots gets lost, comes over to the east side of the Euphrates River, drops a bomb, kills 6 American advisors? If you think that won't escalate, you don't know your history. These are nuclear armed powers staring each other down in an area where they only have limited interest. This is a trap. This is a trap. This is a tinderbox. And here's another thing. It's all risk and it's no reward. That's why I've been arguing we need to rethink our Syria policy, because we owe it to the American people to do a cost-benefit analysis anytime we're willing to kill and die for something. And we're willing to kill and die in Syria, but I would argue it's all risk. It's no reward.
You had a recent piece where you talked about how our lovely moral equivalency from the use of chemical weapons versus children becoming orphaned in Yemen with conventional weapons. We want to chat about that for a second.
I'd love to. I think I called the article the American Empathy Gap. That article I called Some Lives Matter, parentheses, more than others. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Here's what's interesting about this, right? Here's what's interesting. Donald Trump, I actually think, does have a soul. That's probably the most controversial thing I'll say now. I think he does, okay? And I believe him that he comes nearly to tears when he sees images of Syrian children choking on allegedly chlorine gas or in the past sarin gas. I believe him because I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that he has a heart. Now, 99% of the civilian deaths in Syria have not been caused by poison gas. They've been caused by barrel bombs that have either through incendiary force or through rubbling of buildings crushed people to death, essentially, okay? That is what has killed most Syrian civilians. When that happens, when a house falls on a family, no response from the United States.
Nope.
So there's two problems. One is an ethnic problem, I'm going to get to in a second, and the second one is a means of death problem. What is the moral difference between choking to death and being suffocated to death by rubble? There isn't any, right? No. People are equally dead, lives are equally destroyed, families are equally just totally taken apart. Somehow we've decided that the only deaths that matter are the ones that involve choking on an illegal gas. Now, I agree that we should follow some sort of international protocols and there should be laws against this, but it's a little interesting that we only seem to care about you if you die a certain way. That's the first problem. The second problem is this. Why do Syrian babies bring the president nearly to tears, but Yemeni babies don't? Why do I say Yemen? Because in Yemen, as I've written on numerous occasions, the United States Air Force is refueling Saudi bombers, selling the Saudis the guided munitions they're dropping, and providing targeting intelligence documents telling them where to strike. Okay? So we are complicit in the war in Yemen. Yemen is the largest humanitarian disaster on the planet today. Upwards of 10,000 civilians dead in bombings. Apparently those don't matter because they're not gas bombs, right? And there are bombs. There are American-made bombs that are killing families. And the problem with the bombing is it has second and third order effects. One of them is cholera has broken out because there's no hospitals, right? And there's no medical treatment. There's no preventative care anymore. So the largest cholera epidemic in recorded human history is currently happening in Yemen. The second thing that's happening is famine because Saudi Arabia is blockading Yemen, not letting any food in, not letting anything in, on top of all the bombing. So somewhere in the realm of 20 million Yemenis are reliant on food aid because they don't grow enough food there to begin with, and the blockade is not letting any imports in. Yemeni children, I will show you. Shit, Google my name and Google Yemen, and you're going to see pictures of starving Yemeni children. Okay, starving to death. Now, tell me that starving to death is not as brutal and terrible a death as sucking in chlorine gas. They're equally horrific. In fact, starving to death is probably slower. I want presidential tiers for both Yemeni children and Syrian children. I want a little bit of consistency in America for two reasons. One is a moral reason. I find it morally insufferable and indefensible to only care about one group and not another. That's the first reason. The second reason is strategic. And I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but this matters too. Because if we look like hypocrites, if we look like we have an empathy gap, if we seem as though we value some lives more than others, that endangers American soldiers and American policy, because the Arab street, quote unquote, the average people, they make a judgment of America. And if the thing you're most scared of is terrorists, here's lesson number one. Rule number one, don't make more. Don't make more terrorists. And when you value Syrian lives, but you are complicit in the death of Yemeni lives, potentially even through starvation, what you're doing is you're tarnishing America in the world, in the Middle East, and you're creating more terrorists. And one of those terrorists is going to come to New York. And that's it. And we have to keep that in mind. Rule number one, do no harm. Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. I'd rather us do nothing than be so inconsistent, which is what I would argue we've been.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's a horrific topic to study, and I know for me, Danny, I'm glad that it's one you're continuing to write about.
It's definitely hurting my mental health, but it's I gotta bang the drum, man. We have to.
Yep. So moving on to something else that's probably bad for your mental health. I wanted to talk for a minute about your series at Truth Dig right now. The Truth Dig for tell me the title again.
It's called American History for Truth Diggers.
That's it.
A bi-weekly piece that I do. I'm going to do 35 of them probably, and then it's going to be a book. They're all going to be compiled into an edited book.
Good, I was going to tell you to do that.
Yeah, I read your mind, or the bosses at Truth Dig read your mind. So what I do. My 8th of 35 will come out this coming Saturday night. And I break down pieces of American history, pieces of the American past. I can't cover all of American history in 35 years, but I strategically choose what I think are very important eras. And I give you what I call the real story or the other story, the other history, the one you didn't learn from Miss Smith in 5th grade, the one you didn't learn from Mrs. Jones in 12th grade. I'm trying to show you things you didn't know that might surprise you in American history. I'm trying to show you that it's often more complex and sometimes a little darker and dirtier than you thought, than you were taught, because so much of our history remains a patriotic fable. The point of my pieces is not just to tarnish America. It's not to say America is the worst country in the world. I don't believe that. What I do believe is we have a rough past that we have to come to terms with. We are not going to be the best version of ourselves. We are not going to support we the people. We are not going to live up to the values espoused in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence unless we admit our mistakes in the past. The point of my series is to say, look, hold a mirror up to America, understand where you've been beautiful, because sometimes we are, and understand where you've been ugly, because oftentimes we are at the same time very ugly. Take those lessons so you can understand our present. I really, really believe you cannot understand who you are today and who you're going to be tomorrow unless you understand what came before. And what scares me is so much of what we believe about ourselves as Americans, about our identity, is either fable or mythology. And it's dangerous when you hear people say things like America is exceptional, America is the indispensable nation, America is a city on a hill. If you believe that and you're willing to whitewash over the exterminations, the crimes, the racism, and the classism, right, that has occurred in our history, then I think that you are perpetuating the problem, part of the problem, and you're not going to make the right decisions in the future. So if you're progressive, than I am, and I'm not afraid to say it, I think you need to understand the history that brought us to this point and why more progressive policies might be a better fit, because we certainly haven't followed them in the past for the most part. This week will be about the Constitution. I'll give you a little hint. I'm going to argue that the guys who wrote the Constitution weren't interested in democracy. They were interested in stifling democracy and keeping government at a distance. And that is the exact opposite of what you've heard. You don't have to take my word for it. Read my piece. Argue with me if you don't like it. Send me an email. But I promise you that I always read and review several books before I write them. And everything I talk about is definitely grounded in scholarship. So this is not just a lay history. This is a mix of popular history that is accessible to the masses, but also scholarship. So I'm happy to have the debate, but at least give my pieces a read with an open mind.
Yeah, I think I'm on part 5 or part 6 now, but I can't tell you how much I've learned just from reading those 5 articles. The most interesting to me, the discussion about how varied the opinions were of all the colonists as to whether or not to side with the revolution or to stay loyal to the British, and how that is a very nuanced timeline that happened, and that it was, 1776, people didn't all just magically jump up and say, hey, we're Americans now. It's much more detailed than that.
Yeah, probably about one thing people don't understand, but scholars have known for years, is that probably about 1/3 of American colonists were patriots, meaning they wanted to break away from the British and form their own republic. About 1/3 were loyalists who wanted to stay part of the British Empire, and about 1/3 were fence sitters, and meaning they were waiting to see what happened. They were too busy just trying to fucking cut wood and hunt for their family, and they didn't take a side, and they were waiting to see who was winning. Most civil wars go that way. If you want to look at this, because that's what the American Revolution was. It was a civil war. Okay, it was more than just a war of independence. Yes, it was an anti-colonial war against an empire. That's one part of what the Civil War was. It was also a social revolution, which I argue in those pieces. The third thing it was a civil war, because Americans were killing Americans. Okay, Englishmen were killing Englishmen, because the truth is that's what we were. And and most people didn't even start using the word American until later in the war, or at least until independence was declared in '76. Another thing people don't realize is that loyalists remained in the country and had to be integrated back into the Republic as Americans, and about 150,000 of them left and went to Canada. So there were a lot of people who just said, I don't want to be part of America. I'm British, and they went to Canada, and their ancestors live in Canada today. In fact, millions of Canadians can actually trace themselves back to those same 100,000 or so American loyalists, which no one knows that, right? No one. This is the kind of shit that I lay out in the series. I can tell 1,000 stories. I'm not going to do it tonight, but pick it up. Google Truth Dig, American History for Truth Diggers. Throw my name in there with American History. You'll see it. Good stuff coming up this Saturday at Truth Dig, talking about the Constitution, which I call the counter-revolution of 1787.
Sounds great, Danny. I'm looking forward to reading it. So the next thing I wanted to talk with you about was I've been working much more slowly than I'd like to, but I've been working on an outline for an Iraq War video series. And the premise of it is for us to start to go back far enough to where we can really talk about the origins of the Iraq War, about the societal parts of Iraq that, was President Qasem from back in '58, and then but all the different iterations and how all those different factors, little tidbits in there, led us to the war. But very defined chapters. The next one we'll discuss. The second one will be like about 9/11 and the things around 9/11 and our preparations to invade. And part 3 is probably going to get into the actual invasion up till the surge. And then 4 is going to be, I think, the surge to the withdrawal. And then 5 is going to be post invasion Iraq. So I'm looking for other veterans. I'm looking for other guys to contribute stories for this, and they can be stories of really any kind. But the biggest thing is that we have a chronological date for it, that we actually know where it was, so we can fit it in the right spot. But if you have stories to share, they could be combat stories, they could be non-combat stories. Please email me. We'd really
we'll put you on the air. We'll put you on video. You'll be part of the documentary.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, is that I want a lot of veterans' faces to be part of this, and their stories to help support some of the facts and the events that happened as they went.
Whether you are proud of your service in Iraq or embarrassed of your service in Iraq or somewhere in the middle like me, what I think we're going to find out, and this is a prediction, right? I'll be dead when I'm proven right, but I will be proven right. The prediction is that the Iraq War in 2003 will go down as one of the great foreign policy debacles in American history. And the reason this series that Henry came up with, right, is his idea, and it's a brilliant idea. The reason that I think he wants to do this and that we want to do this is because if this indeed is one of the pivotal turning points in American foreign policy history, we owe it to ourselves to know. Okay, we owe it to ourselves to know how we got here. It's that backstory again. It's that history again, and it's a living history that continues to today, and it's going to continue past today because all signs point to American soldiers remaining in Iraq for quite some time. I will say this: I would argue that we're fighting our fourth Iraq War right now. Okay, the first Iraq War was when we took sides with Saddam Hussein, with that evil dictator in the 1980s while he fought against Iran. We sold him weapons. We sent Donald Rumsfeld to shake his hand. We took him off the state sponsors of terror list, and we even sold him some of the components that made the chlorine gas, or I'm sorry, made the mustard gas that killed thousands and thousands of Kurds. That was Iraq War I, 1980 to 1988 when that war ended. Iraq War II is when we changed sides after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Okay, when he did that, we fought Desert Storm, which is usually thought of as the first Iraq War. I'll argue it's the second. That's number 2. Number 3 is the war that me and Henry fought in. Okay, that's OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, which is a stupid name for invading a country. But when we invaded the country in 2003 until we officially took the ground troops out in December 2011, okay, that's Operation Iraqi Freedom. That's Iraq War 3.0. Okay, are you staying with me? 4.0 is when ISIS rises in 2013 and 14, takes over about a third of Iraq, and the Americans have to get back involved. Okay, where we decide to get back involved with air power and advisors, and we're still fighting the fourth war. Do you think there'll be an Iraq War 5.0? I do, unfortunately. And the question in our Iraq War video series is, how did we get here? And what does the way we got here tell us about the way forward? Okay, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yep, exactly. So if you're a veteran and you want to contribute stories, please do. If you know a veteran who's served, let them know that we're looking for stories and throw them out there. They can be little video clips. We can play audio. They can be. I'm happy to write if somebody wants to send a letter, or even if it's anonymous. Even if you want to send a story and you don't want to put your name on it,
we'll read it.
We'll find a way to include it. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that the whole of experience in the war, from its very beginning to its very end, and how all of us human beings survived during that time, what we saw, what we did, and now how we feel about it. Like Danny said, there's definitely for me as with for you, there's a very healthy mix of some a little bit of pride, but mostly shame. The things we did there did not really help the people, and that at the end of the day, what do we say about the lives that we lost? And I don't say that those lives were for nothing. I don't believe that for a second, but I do think that it could have been done. It could have been something else. It was our choice post 9/11 to take our military and spread it around the world was a horrible one. England,
we're living with the consequences today.
Yeah, and we are living with the consequences now. So, but look out for that. It's probably going to be a couple months in the works. But yeah, and please let anybody know that you think might be willing to participate.
Yeah, last word on that is, me and Henry don't want the historians and the academics and the ivory tower types to tell our story. There's a place for that, and I hope they do write it, and I respect academics, but we don't want them to be the totality of the story. We think the veterans need to tell the story of their own war.
Absolutely.
An ongoing war.
So, Danny, I wanted to talk to you about another idea I had. This one is about a defense writers roundtable. It is essentially would be kind of an online meetup, of something that we could record, and a discussion between different people who write subjects on defense. And I say defense writers because I want to both include veterans and non-veterans. There are a lot of really good journalists that write about what happens in the world as far as the military is concerned, and they have a good perspective. And I think it's important to bring those voices in. There's people like Jeremy Scahill at The Intercept, who has covered every place around the world, been embedded in with military units. And so the idea of having people like him to come and talk to us about their experiences and also about making their stories. I want Iona Craig was the first big fish, if we want to call it that. But I'd like to have some more, and I want to have that good discussion. So,
yeah, that's great. I agree. I think defense writers, journalists, veterans, all different flavors, mainstream newspapers, independent media. We want all that.
Absolutely. So, Danny, did Mike Pompeo serve in the military?
He did. He was first in his class at West Point, which is the only thing we have in common is we went to the same school. He's a hawk. He wants to go to war with Iran. He wants to go to war with North Korea. He essentially wants to go to war with everybody based on his record, but he hasn't personally done too much war going. He sort of missed the Gulf War, which wasn't a very serious war. I don't mean to denigrate the service people who were on the front lines fighting, but it was a very limited, short duration war. We only had about 90 Americans were killed in action, about 150 total if you include the fratricide and the mistakes. So he didn't even serve in the Gulf War, and that's not his fault. Doesn't make him a bad guy. His 5 years of mandatory military service after West Point was up right around the time of that war, because I think he was a 1986 graduate, which means he was able to leave the military in 1991. But President Trump is going to take this guy's military record, he's going to plaster it everywhere, and he's going to hold that up as credibility, and he's going to tell the American people that you should listen to Mike Pompeo, you should listen to Secretary of State Pompeo, because he's a West Pointer and he's an Army officer. He knows about war. All I'm saying is no, he does not, at least not from a personal perspective.
No.
Which does not make him a bad man or in and of itself make him unqualified, but we just need to correct the record, because the administration is going to try to fool us. The administration is going to try to tell us he's one thing when he's really another. Okay, he served in peacetime in the Army, honorably, I'm sure, extraordinary intelligent, first in his class at West Point. But this is not a man who fought Operation Iraqi Freedom. This is not a man who has served in the last 15 to 17 years of war. So let's just clear that up. I think it needs to be said once.
And as a veteran, as a guy who's seen combat, I don't hold it against him that he didn't do that.
No.
The thing that I hold against him is that every government profile that you can find on him says that the man served in Operation Desert Storm. And I was chatting with somebody on Twitter about it, and they mentioned, well, it probably somebody inferred that, and he just hasn't corrected them. And it's like, it's his job to correct them. If somebody believes something about you that's false, you have a duty to go and deal with it, and especially when it comes to leadership and our government. And so, yeah, for however many years, however many times, he's let lots of people believe that he's a Gulf War veteran, and he's no such thing. It doesn't matter to me whether he is or he isn't, but it does matter that he fucking lies about it.
Yeah, yes, correct the record once, get it straight, tell the article, whoever wrote the article that says you're a Gulf War veteran, tell him the first time, hey, just make sure you get this right. The guy has plenty to be proud of in his career. He's plenty of successes, but what we don't need is people posturing as something they're not. And I agree with you. I think that I'm glad we're saying it, and I'm glad it's getting out there a little bit. But too many people don't know, and are going to continue to be misinformed.
Danny, tell us about you. You wrote a recent article on the new AUMF, and tell us a little bit about that.
I did, and I have another one coming out at Tom Dispatch this coming Thursday. It's really, really long. It's a much lengthier exposition on the AUMF. So the AUMF is the authorization for the use of military force. It was signed 3 days after 9/11 while the rubble was still smoking. I would argue that's not the best time to decide on a forever war, which is what we did. We gave the president broad-based powers to fight anyone associated with al-Qaeda. That's fine. What we did not do is put a term limit on it. We did not put any sunset provision after which it had to be reviewed and renewed. And another thing we did not do is we did not clarify what we mean by al-Qaeda and associated forces. So presidents, plural, Bush, Obama, and Trump, have all used that blank check authorization to fight anybody who's vaguely Arab and moderate, nominally Muslim. I mean, that's how it's been done. Anyone we don't like in the Middle East, we bomb, we kill, and then we say the legal sanction for this is the 9/11 AUMF. But that's not accurate, right? By any logical frame of mind, because the reality is most of the groups we fight today had nothing to do with 9/11. Bashar al-Assad, nothing to do with it. Saddam Hussein, nothing to do with it. ISIS didn't even exist. Al-Shabaab in Somalia didn't even exist. We're killing these people, we're fighting them, but we don't have a legal sanction. I was happy at first when Tim Kaine, a Democrat from Virginia, and Bob Corker, a Republican from Tennessee, I believe, when they came together and said that they were going to put forward a new AUMF, an updated AUMF, I was happy, because I was hoping that what it would do is it would narrow the focus and would tell the president, you only have authorization to fight X people, and if you want to fight Y people, this other group, then you have to come to Congress, which is what the Constitution says. Okay, Article 1, Section 8. Congress declares war. That's not how we do it anymore. We haven't declared war since 1941. Presidents wage war almost unilaterally. The problem with the Corker-Kane bill, and you'll see this at my Tom Dispatch piece on Thursday, is it gives post facto authorization to the president. It says everything you're doing now is fine. You may continue to attack all the people you are currently attacking. We're bombing 7 countries, just so you know, without any oversight. And if you want to bomb someone else, all you have to do is convince us. All you have to do is tell us that they're associated or successor forces. That's very, very vague language. And in order for Congress, in order for the Senate to say no to a president, they would need 67 votes because the president can veto Congress saying no. And in order to override a presidential veto, you need 67 votes in the Senate. So what it does, this is what Corker-Kane's bill does. It's not a good bill, okay? It is a bad bill that is masquerading as something that is beneficial to the United States. What it does is it inverts the system. The system is supposed to be Congress, both houses of Congress have to decide to go to war, which it's difficult for them to agree, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
It's supposed to be hard to go to war. What this does is it transfers the onus to the president and says the president can choose to fight anyone, and then if we don't like it, then we can try to stop him. But it's very hard to stop him because at that point you need 67 votes. So what it does is it inverts the Constitution, which is fascinating because so many of the conservatives who like this bill are the ones who say they're strict constitutional constructionists, that they think we should listen to the Constitution as though its words are the word of God from the 18th century. But on this issue, they kind of flip that, don't they? And they say, no, we're willing to stretch and or change the Constitution. I'm worried about this for a number of reasons. Check out my article. My argument is this: there's very little legal sanction for the wars we're currently fighting in either domestic or international law, and Corker-Kane's bill is only going to solidify and give permission to the president and reward bad behavior, which is what scares me.
Yeah, I don't see any hope for a new one. At least maybe if we have a huge blue wave in November, that there's a chance that they could make a new one. But even still, you have so many Democrats that are Democrats in name only. So you're just not gonna. I don't know how that's ever gonna happen. So.
Right, agreed.
All right. So our last thing for today, and we really want to thank you guys for coming and joining us. Last thing for today is a blog post from State Department whistleblower and friend of the podcast, Matthew Ho, and he was our first guest, and he gave a talk recently about the idea that PTSD in and of itself drives veterans to commit suicide. And his blog was about that no, it's not that. That PTSD is generally not, if seldom, the reason that people kill themselves. It's because of guilt. It's because of guilt over actions taken in a combat zone, deaths, wounding, whatever it happens to be, and how people are able to deal with that emotionally. And I'm really glad that he talked about this, and the video he made, I don't know that I'd be comfortable, going into that much detail about it, but he did. And the video and the blog that he wrote will be linked in the bottom of the video for you guys to take a look at it if you'd like. But it's really important that people understand that misconception. They understand that PTSD is very much a situational mental disease. It's based on what the person went through, and it doesn't have to be combat. It could be all kinds of different situations that can deeply affect somebody. So, Danny?
Yeah, I think the important point here. So first of all, just backing up, Matt Ho is a State Department whistleblower. He dissented against the Obama expansion of the war in Afghanistan, and he is himself a military and war veteran, and also a State Department veteran, a very bright guy. And he decided to speak up, okay, and he resigned out of conscience, which is very rare. The argument he's making is that the complex milieu of factors that go into someone's suicide cannot be drilled down to 4 letters, okay,
no.
PTSD. It's more than that. There's something called moral injury that's being studied right now, this idea that killing, dying, and watching death can morally damage you, that this is such a thing, and there are academics writing about it. That's a major factor. Guilt over soldiers you feel responsible for having lost, if you're a commander or a sergeant. guilt about maybe potential civilians who were killed or injured by you, probably by accident, okay, or even potentially on purpose. And I buy it. I buy his argument, you know, and I'm sure there's a lot of empirical data out there to bolster it, but you know, just anecdotally, I buy it as someone who has felt guilt, has been in some dark places. I think that it is more than PTSD, and I think guilt is a very, very, very dangerous emotion. It can really cripple someone's life, and it could even lead them to want to take their own. And yeah, I'm kind of glad we're ending on this topic because I think if there's a theme for tonight, it's be careful how you use your soldiers. Be careful what you ask them to do, because the second and third order effects are forever. They last for the rest of the life of the young soldiers who may have been 18 when they fought. The government will need to potentially take care of them and protect them and pay for them for up to 70 more years, and also for their families. And so, look, the military is a tool. It is a broadsword. It is not a scabbard. It is a heavy tool that should only be used in case of emergency. Think of it as the glass case that says, you know, break in case of emergency. This idea of using the military constantly and indefinitely and perpetually, as we have for the last 17 years, is I would argue, doing not only psychological damage to the veterans, but it's causing moral injury to the vets and moral injury to the country at large. The Republic is suffering from moral injury, and that's really the last thing I want to say about that.
Oh, it's it's a deep thing to dig into, no matter what way you come from it, and I'm curious to read more about their research about moral injury and the fitting that into the psychology of it. But some stuff is just that hard to put down.
Yeah.
So
it's a weight that people are carrying and you don't see it. It's an invisible monkey on the back of people walking down the street that look just like you and me. You have no idea what they've done in the past. You know what they've been through, and they're your neighbors and they're your friends and their coworkers, and this is what happens. Right? This is when you stretch that rubber band, it's gonna snap, and when it does, it hurts. It hurts everyone. And so let's just keep that in mind. Let's keep our veterans in our hearts in a real way. Let's not just thank them for their service. Let's not just put a sticker on our car. Let's invest in our veterans after they come back from what we've asked them to do, and that means investing in them in terms of healthcare, economics, jobs, and whatever else they need, they and their families.
Well, guys, I think that's going to wrap it up for our live stream for today. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Hope you enjoyed it. I know it's been kind of fun for Danny and I to do this live thing. It's not something we've done before, but it gave kind of an interesting way to podcast in a different way. And we do plan to do it more in the future. So
yeah, we're definitely going to do it again. This is fun. You know, write in, comment. We'll talk about it on the air. We're just happy to do it. And we'll see you next week when we're going to record another episode and do some more stuff.
Yep. You'll see us a new episode next Friday. So Great. Hope you guys had a good night, and thank you for joining us.
All right. See y'all.